Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in North Carolina's history. Before we start, please tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. We want to know where these documented stories go and what times of day or night they get there. Elias Turner disappeared into the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina in 1842. The fact that someone went missing wasn't unusual. Slaves often ran away from their masters. But what happened next would haunt Wilkes County for a long time. It wasn't until those who had been chasing Turner started to disappear one by one that the strange nature of his escape became clear. It all started with a simple note in the ledger of plantation owner Jeremiah Caldwell. Negro man Elias absconded this day, March 2nd, 1842. What should have been a routine entry among countless others would eventually be studied by investigators, historians, and the morbidly curious for decades to come. Because Elias Turner didn't just run, he seemed to vanish completely, taking with him a dark knowledge that would eventually consume those who had tormented him. About 20 miles west of Willsboro, Caldwell Plantation was in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The property had more than 800 acres of tobacco fields and was surrounded by thick woods to the north that eventually led to the towering mountains. Later on, this geography would be very important for figuring out what really happened during those awful months of 1842. The Caldwell Plantation had 28 slaves in 1840, according to tax records. One of them, Elias Turner, was a 30-year-old man who was mentally and physically healthy and worth $800. These medical records didn't say anything about how Turner was different from the others. A Methodist minister gathered stories from survivors in 1863. They said he was unnaturally quiet and had a stare that could freeze the blood in your veins. In 1962, renovations to the old plantation house revealed a personal diary kept by James Caldwell, Jeremiah's youngest son. His writings from 1841 show that he was becoming more and more worried about Turner. Father's slave, Elias, troubles me greatly. He watches us at supper through the windows. When we go to him, he lowers his eyes, but there's something behind them, something waiting. Until early 1842, the daily rhythms of the plantation went on as usual. That year, winter was especially bad. The Wilkes County Agricultural Society has records of crop failures and livestock deaths all over the area. Food ran out, and things got worse on the plantation. The events started against this backdrop of hardship. In 1957, the State Archives found a household ledger kept by Martha Caldwell, Jeremiah's wife. Her usually neat handwriting gets more and more messy in entries from January 1842. Strange noises from the slave quarters again tonight. Jeremiah insists it's just the wind, but I know better. It's been happening since Elias was put in the cellar last week for stealing food. Oral histories from the descendants of nearby landowners say that Elias Turner was caught stealing extra food from the storehouse during times of food shortage. He was punished harshly. He had to stay in the root cellar under the main house for 7 days. It was a small space that was always damp from the creek nearby, which often flooded during heavy rains. Witnesses said that Turner was different when he came out of his cell. Sarah Miller, a house slave whose testimony was recorded by Union soldiers during Reconstruction, said, "When Mr. Jeremiah brought Elias up from that cellar, he wasn't the same man who went down. His eyes had gone all hollow, and he wouldn't speak, not even to us. But he'd smile sometimes, looking at the master's family, a smile that wasn't right." For the next 6 weeks, things got worse on the plantation. James Caldwell's diary entries get more and more worried. The 12th of February, 1842, Elias was caught standing still in Father's study after hours. When asked what he was doing, he said he was cleaning, but he didn't have a broom or cloth. Father whipped him, but he didn't make a sound, not even a cry. The North Carolina State Archives have a partial copy of Overseer Thomas Whitaker's ledger that shows many of Turner's wrongdoings in February, such as refusing to work, being found in places he shouldn't have been, and being caught whispering to other slaves at night. The punishments got worse, but witnesses say Turner stayed unnervingly calm. Martha Caldwell's ledger has a scary entry from the 1st of March, 1842. Found a strange arrangement of twigs and animal bones beneath our bedroom window this morning. Jeremiah says it's just children playing, but I've forbidden James from going near the slave quarters. Something is brewing among them, I'm sure. James Caldwell's diary says that a terrible storm hit the area that night. A fire broke out in a storage shed after lightning hit it. The fire spread to part of the slave quarters. Elias Turner went missing in the chaos that came after. The diary says, "Father is beside himself. Elias has run away in the middle of the storm and fire. Thomas and the others will leave with the dogs at first light. Father says an example must be made when he is caught." We have put together what happened next from a number of sources, such as county records, letters from people, and oral histories that have been passed down through the years. The next morning, Overseer Thomas Whitaker and 5 men, 2 of whom were experienced slave catchers from nearby Montgomery County, set out. They brought 4 tracking dogs and supplies for a long hunt, and they were sure they would be back with Turner in a few days. Jeremiah Caldwell wrote to his brother in Richmond on the 10th of March 1842 and said he was angry that the search party had not come back. They sent a messenger 3 days ago saying they had found tracks leading deep into the mountains. Thomas believes the fugitive is trying to reach the communities of free colors rumored to exist in the high country. They will continue the pursuit. There was no more news from the search party. Jeremiah Caldwell put together a second group after 2 weeks to look for both Turner and the missing men. James's son, James and Frederick Harrison, a plantation owner in the area, led this group of 10 men into the foothills. James Caldwell's diary entries from this search show that he was getting more and more scared. "We found the remains of a camp about 15 miles into the mountains. There are signs of Thomas and his men, but they are nowhere to be found. The dogs are agitated and refuse to track further up the slopes. 2 of the men are talking about turning back." 3 days later, I found one of Thomas's tracking dogs, or what was left of it. The animal was skinned with incredible skill, and its body was arranged in a strange way that I can't describe in detail. Frederick says this is the work of Indians, but there haven't been any Cherokee in these parts for years. The men are scared, so we keep going tomorrow. His last entry, from March 25th, said, "Found a cave entrance partly hidden by undergrowth. Inside, signs of recent habitation." A piece of cloth, identified as belonging to Thomas, was discovered, along with unusual markings scratched into the stone. We will make camp and explore deeper at first light. Frederick believes we are close. I am no longer certain I wish to find what we are seeking. This would be the last thing written down by the second search party. The men did not go back to the Caldwell plantation. People in Wilkes County were very worried when they went missing. The county sheriff's office has records that show a formal investigation started in early April 1842. These records are kept in the regional archives. Sheriff William Donnelly wrote to the governor on April 12th, asking for more help. The disappearance of 15 men, including prominent citizens, represents an unprecedented crisis. Local superstition has taken hold, with rumors of vengeful spirits and Indian curses spreading among both white and colored communities. I respectfully request a detachment of state militia to assist in a thorough search of the mountain region and to restore public confidence. Captain Martin Blackwood and 30 militia members came to Willsboro on April 20th as a response from the state. Their official report, which they filed on May 15 after weeks of searching, doesn't give many answers. Despite extensive efforts, no trace of the missing search parties has been discovered, save for abandoned camps and certain items of personal property. The difficult terrain and onset of unseasonable storms hampered our efforts. It is the opinion of this command that the men may have become disoriented in the wilderness and perished from exposure or accident. This explanation did little to calm the growing anxiety in the county. The story of militia scout Edward Jenkins was especially troubling. It was published in the Raleigh Observer in 1859 as part of a series on unsolved mysteries of the state. He said, "We found a strange clearing about 20 miles into the mountains, accessible only by a nearly invisible trail. The ground had been disturbed in many places, as if for shallow graves, but our digging revealed nothing. Most unsettling was a crude shelter built against a large boulder, inside which we discovered a collection of personal effects, buttons, a pocket watch, tobacco pouches, items belonging to different men, arranged with deliberate care. The militia's search didn't find any clear answers, so life on the Caldwell plantation changed a lot. Jeremiah Caldwell became more and more reclusive after losing both his overseer and his son. Martha Caldwell's household ledgers show that the property was not being taken care of as well and that agricultural output was going down. In the summer of 1842, there are a lot of entries that talk about strange things happening and trouble at night. Samuel Wright, a plantation owner next door, wrote to his son in Charleston, "The Caldwell place is falling apart. Jeremiah hardly leaves the main house, and there are rumors that the slaves are working without enough supervision. The most troubling stories are that some of them have been seen wearing things that belong to the missing men. A gold pocket watch here, a fine leather boot there." When Martha asked them about it, they said these things were gifts from the mountain. Things got worse as fall drew closer. County records show that on the 3rd of September 1842, Martha Caldwell was found dead at the bottom of the main staircase in the plantation house. The coroner's report said the cause was an accidental fall, but stories in the local newspapers suggest that things were worse than that. The Willsburg Gazette's short obituary says that servants heard Mrs. Caldwell arguing with someone she didn't know shortly before her fatal accident, but Mr. Caldwell says she was alone. Jeremiah Caldwell sold the plantation to a land speculator from Virginia the day after Martha's funeral and left the county. The county's records show that the property sold for less than half of what it was worth on the market. More importantly, the document doesn't say anything about the slaves, whose legal status became unclear after that. A letter from Jeremiah to his brother-in-law, written from Richmond and dated October 1842, gives some insight into his hasty departure. "I could no longer remain in that place. The things I witnessed in those final weeks defy rational explanation. The slaves moved about the property as if guided by some unseen presence. Objects disappeared and reappeared in impossible locations, and always at the edge of the forest. I felt eyes upon me, his eyes, though he is surely dead in the mountains. Elias Turner haunts Caldwell land still. I have abandoned everything to escape what I can only describe as a creeping madness that has infected the very soil." In the next month, the former Caldwell slaves spread out. Some went to free areas, while others joined communities of free blacks that were already there. There is no record of the former plantation's workers in the county census from 1850. The land itself stayed mostly empty until after the Civil War. In 1867, a businessman from the North bought the land with plans to start a lumber business. This business didn't last long. Company records found during historical research in 1958 show that there were ongoing issues, such as equipment breakdowns, worker accidents, and a higher than normal rate of workers leaving the company. The manager's logs show that he was getting more and more frustrated. Men refused to work the north section bordering the forest. Claims of voices and unexplained movements among the trees. 3 more workers left without getting paid this week. Local superstitions make it impossible to keep enough workers. By 1869, the lumber operation had been shut down. Over the next few decades, the property changed hands a number of times, never staying with one owner for very long. The story of Elias Turner became a regional legend as local folklore began to come together around it. Folklorist Margaret Simmons put together a collection of oral histories in 1932 that show how the story has changed over time, as told by descendants of the people who lived there. These stories all say that Turner learned some kind of forbidden knowledge while he was locked up in the root cellar. One old informant said, "The old people said that cellar wasn't just dark because there was no light. It was dark because there was something older than the mountains themselves. When they put Elias down there, he wasn't alone. And what he learned from being in that darkness for 7 days was something no man was meant to know." Another common theme in these folk tales is Turner's supposed discovery of hidden cave systems in the mountains, where he built his own kingdom and led his pursuers to their deaths. My granddaddy said Elias learned a language of the mountain itself. He could talk to the rocks and make them move, opening up paths where there had been none before. He built himself a kingdom inside that mountain, and those who had wronged him, he called them to it one by one. In 1965, Professor Howard Mitchell of the University of North Carolina led an archaeological survey of the old Caldwell property, which was a short-lived attempt to look into the case again. His team found the foundations of the original plantation buildings, including the root cellar where Turner had been kept. Mitchell's field notes, which are kept at the university, said that the cellar was built in an unusual way, with parts of the foundation stonework having markings that were not typical for buildings of that time. Excavation also showed that the cellar floor had been built directly over what looked like a natural fissure in the bedrock. This fissure was a narrow but deep crack that soil samples showed had let groundwater into the space from time to time. The most important thing that was found happened when the search parties were looking around the mountain area where they had gone missing. Based on the unclear directions from historical records, Mitchell's team found a group of small caves about 20 miles from the old plantation site. They found human bones inside one of these caves, which were partially hidden by a rockfall that was found to be decades old. Mitchell's official report says skeletal remains of multiple individuals were recovered from the cave site. Preliminary analysis indicates the presence of at least 8 distinct persons, all male, with evidence suggesting they died during the same approximate time period. Several artifacts were recovered alongside the remains, including buttons, personal effects, and fragments of weapons, consistent with the 1842 period. The report goes on to say, the most notable thing was the arrangement of the remains, which does not suggest natural death or accidental circumstances. The positioning appears deliberate, with skeletal elements disarticulated and reassembled in a pattern that suggests ritual significance. This finding goes against what historians thought about what happened to the search parties, and it raises troubling questions about how they died. University officials stopped the investigation before it could be fully analyzed because of budget issues and ethical concerns about disturbing possible unmarked graves. The bodies were buried again, and the entrance to the cave was closed off. In November 1965, the project was officially canceled after Professor Mitchell's requests for more money were turned down. Mitchell's personal papers, which he gave to the university archive after he died in 1968, show that he was upset that his research was cut short. The Turner case represents a significant historical mystery that merits thorough investigation. The evidence suggests not a simple tale of an escaped slave and unfortunate search parties, but something far more complex and perhaps darker, involving calculated retribution carried out with methodical precision. That the university administration chose to abandon the project, just as we were uncovering substantive evidence, strikes me as suspiciously convenient for those who prefer comfortable mythologies to uncomfortable truths. The last official investigation into the Turner case took place in 1967 when local historian Ellen Fulton tried to find out what happened to Jeremiah Caldwell after he left North Carolina. Her research, which was published in the Journal of Southern History, showed that Caldwell had died in Richmond under strange circumstances just 6 months after moving there. Police reports that Fulton found say that Caldwell was found dead in his rented rooms in March 1843. The official cause of death was apoplexy, but the notes from the doctor who treated Fulton, which he got from medical archives, showed more disturbing details. Subject discovered in extreme state of terror. Facial muscles frozen in expression of profound horror. No external wounds or signs of struggle, yet room was in disarray, with furniture overturned and walls marred by what appeared to be desperate scratching. Most curious was the presence of soil, matching mountain clay composition, scattered across the floor despite the urban setting, and absence of such soil in the vicinity. The sworn statement from Caldwell's landlady was probably the most disturbing. She said she heard him talking the night he died, even though he lived alone and had no visitors. She said she heard him scream, "You can't be here. You're dead in the mountains. I saw your body myself." In the years that followed these investigations, the story of Elias Turner faded back into local folklore. The old Caldwell plantation was eventually turned into national forest land, and the wilderness that Turner had come from to get his revenge took back the ruins of its buildings. There are still reports of hikers and campers seeing strange things in the area from time to time. Park Service records show that some visitors have heard voices calling from deep in the woods, especially around dusk. Others say they saw a lone figure watching from faraway ridgelines, but when they tried to find a trail or a way to get there, they couldn't. In 1969, a history student looking into slave communities before the Civil War found a document in the state archives that had been missed before. This was the last disturbing piece of the Turner story. In 1878, an old woman named Rebecca Harris gave a deposition in which she said she had been a house slave at a nearby plantation during the Turner incident. Her testimony, recorded by a Freedmen's Bureau official, offers perhaps the most chilling perspective on what truly happened. Folks think Elias learned something evil in that cellar. But that ain't right. What he learned was patience. He already knew what he was going to do long before they put him down there. I remember him telling me once, "The mountains got long memories, longer than any man." They've been watching us all along. After he ran, and those men went missing, people started whispering about haunts and devils, but I knew better. Elias wasn't possessed by no spirit. He was the spirit that possessed others. Them men that went looking for him, they found him all right, and he welcomed them into his new home one by one. Not with chains like they'd done him, but with something that called to the darkness in their own hearts. When Mr. Jeremiah sold up and ran away, I heard him crying in his room the night before, saying over and over, "He's calling me too. I hear him every night now. He won't stop until I answer." That's when I knew for certain. Elias Turner never did vanish into the mountains. He became them. The official story about what happened to Elias Turner and the men who chased him is still unclear. The archaeological evidence found in 1965 pointed to a violent end for the search parties, but it didn't give any clear answers about how one escaped slave could have overpowered several armed men or how Turner himself died. The historical record makes it clear that something terrible and extraordinary happened in the Blue Ridge Mountains in the spring of 1842. It destroyed the Caldwell family, scattered their human property to the winds, and left behind a legacy of fear that still echoes through local stories more than 100 years later. People who know the area still talk about some of the mountain's more remote areas where the trees grow unnaturally thick and quiet, where compass needles spin without purpose, and modern GPS devices inexplicably fail. They tell stories of hikers who, as the sun sets, hear a soft voice coming from the old trees. The voice knows their names and talks about home, safety, and rest after a long trip. People say that if you listen to that voice and follow it deeper into the wild as night falls, you might find a narrow path that wasn't there before. If you keep going that way, you'll come to a cave entrance that is partly hidden by bushes. There are strange markings carved into the stone around the mouth of the cave. And they say that a man with hollow eyes and a terrible smile has been waiting for you just inside for a very long time. A man who went into the mountains in 1842 and never came back, but he never really left. In the end, maybe the most frightening thing about the Turner case is not what might have happened to those who went after him, but the idea that something of him is still out there, waiting in the dark mountains for those who, knowingly or not, follow in the footsteps of his enemies. A journal found in 1964 adds to this already disturbing story. Dr. Lawrence Pearson owned the leather-bound book. He was a doctor who treated several members of the Caldwell family in the months before Elias Turner went missing. The Wilkes County Historical Society got a collection of medical records that included the journal. The journal has notes that make the events seem even more evil. Dr. Pearson writes in his diary from January 1842, called to Caldwell Plantation to attend to slave owner's son James, suffering from nightmares and sleep disturbances. The young man claims to see a figure standing at the foot of his bed each night, a silent, watching presence that vanishes when he calls out. His description matches that of their slave, Elias. He continues, prescribed laudanum to aid sleep, though I suspect the boy's troubles stem more from guilt than any supernatural cause. A later entry from February 10th shows that Martha Caldwell is now showing the same signs as her son. She complains of feeling watched all the time, especially near the North Woods. During the examination, she told me that her husband had punished Elias in strange ways that were worse than normal. She wouldn't say more, but she seemed very upset by what had happened. Her hand shook so much that she could barely hold her teacup. Pearson's last note about the Caldwells. dated February 28, just days before Turner escaped, is the most telling. Summoned urgently to the plantation after Overseer Thomas Whitaker collapsed during evening meal, found the man in a state of extreme agitation, feverish, and raving about what they did to Turner in the cellar. When pressed for details, Jeremiah Caldwell dismissed me abruptly, claiming Whitaker was merely drunk. As I departed, noticed Elias watching from the doorway to the kitchen, his expression unnervingly placid given the chaos. For the first time in my 20 years of practice, I felt a chill of genuine dread in that house. Dr. Pearson's journal poses unsettling inquiries regarding the actual events that transpired in the root cellar. What kind of punishment or trauma could have turned an ordinary slave into the terrifying figure from rural history that we know today? The doctor's notes show that whatever happened was so bad that even people who were there or took part in it felt guilty and scared. An unexpected source, the records of the Wilkes County Geological Survey from 1868, give us more information. The survey, which was done to find out more about mineral deposits after the Civil War, included detailed maps of cave systems in the Blue Ridge foothills. Professor William Harrove, the lead geologist from Emory University, wrote something strange about the area where Turner is said to have disappeared. The local limestone formations contain extensive underwater passages, many of which remain unexplored due to dangerous currents and confusing layouts. Most notably, several of these subterranean waterways appear to connect the mountain caves with outlets much closer to settled areas, including one that emerges less than a mile from the former Caldwell property. This geological discovery points to a physical way that Turner might have moved between the plantation and the mountains without being seen. It could have been an actual underground passage that let him come and go as he pleased, adding to the supernatural aspects of his legend. An article in the Raleigh Observer in 1871 talked about an unusual find made by workers clearing land for a railroad expansion near the old Caldwell property. While digging, they found a small underground room that looked like it had been built and hidden on purpose. Inside were a lot of different things. A collection of small bones that were later found to be from local animals, bundles of dried herbs, a knife with strange markings on the blade, and most importantly, a leather pouch with a folded piece of paper that had writing on it that belonged to Elias Turner. The newspaper article that reported on this note said, "They think the darkness their friend when they put me below the earth. They do not know I've been talking to the darkness longer than they've been alive. It listens better than any master ever did. It teaches better lessons, too. Now I know the ways beneath the mountain, the paths no overseer can follow unless I call them, and I will call each one by name when the time comes." This rare written statement from Turner himself suggests that he did find the underground cave system while he was in prison and may have been planning his escape and what to do next long before he had the chance. It's even more disturbing to think that the root cellar might have had a way into these tunnels. Turner's punishment gave him access to the very means of his freedom and revenge, which was a cruel twist of fate that would have made his later campaign against those who had imprisoned him there even more meaningful. In 1845, a Methodist circuit preacher wrote in his diary about a conversation he had with an old slave named Moses, who had worked with Turner on the Caldwell plantation. Reverend Johnson wrote that the old man talked about Turner with both fear and respect. He said that Elias had strange knowledge of plants and their properties even before the cellar incident. This was because he had been raised by a grandmother who practiced traditional healing arts from Africa. After being locked up, this knowledge supposedly grew to include more evil uses, like drugs that could make people hallucinate or paralyze them, or poisons that left no trace. Moses thought Turner had used these drugs against his pursuers, making them weaker before taking them deeper into the mountains. This pharmacological perspective offers a plausible rationale for how a solitary individual could have subdued several armed assailants. In addition to elucidating the accounts of auditory and visual phenomena reported by those who encountered Turner, if he truly had knowledge of indigenous plants with psychoactive effects, he could have caused his victims to have confusing or frightening experiences before killing them. The regional oral histories gathered in the early 1900s often mention something that isn't in official records. The idea that Turner had made deals with small groups of Cherokee who had been able to stay hidden in the mountains after the forced relocations of the 1,832nd. These stories say that Turner's grandmother was friends with the native healers when she was young. She learned some of their ways and made connections that her grandson would later use. Samuel Cooper's 1,928 interview with a man in his 90 seconds gives this point of view. My daddy was just a boy when all this happened, but he remembered what the slaves said. They said Elias had found the hidden people in the mountains, the Indians who wouldn't walk the Trail of Tears. They took him in because his grandma had been nice to their people years before. They taught him how to move through the forest without leaving signs, and how to use the cave paths that ran under the mountains. That's how he could appear and disappear, like smoke. He knew ways of traveling that nobody else remembered. Historians have mostly dismissed these claims as folklore, but archaeological evidence found in 1959 gives them some weight. While building the Blue Ridge Parkway, workers found the remains of a small settlement in a remote valley. They found artifacts from both African and Cherokee people that date back to the mid-19th century. The site had a hidden observation point that looked out over one of the main trails that search parties from the settled areas would have used. This suggests that the community was set up to watch for and possibly stop intruders. An anthropological study conducted at the site, albeit constrained by construction timelines, observed the mixed cultural elements present suggest a cooperative living arrangement between individuals of African and indigenous heritage, likely fugitives from various forms of oppression, who found common cause in their isolation. The defensive positioning of the settlement indicates an awareness of potential threats from the lowlands, while its proximity to several cave entrances aligns with local legends regarding underground passages utilized by escaped slaves. This physical evidence of collaboration between marginalized groups makes it more likely that Turner had help in his fight against his former captors. Instead of acting alone, he may have joined a small but determined group of people who knew the mountain landscape well and were strongly motivated to fight back against slave catchers and other representatives of the plantation system. The summer of 1843 saw another strange turn in the story of the Turners. County records say that a fire destroyed an empty cabin about 5 miles from the old Caldwell plantation. When neighbors looked into the fire, they found the body of a man who was later identified as Daniel Roberts, one of Jeremiah Caldwell's cousins. He had only lived in the area for a short time to help sell the abandoned property. The coroner's report said Roberts died from breathing in smoke, but it also said some strange things happened. The cabin's doors and windows had been blocked from the outside, and a strange symbol had been carved into the main door. This symbol was also found in the cave where the search party's bodies were later found. The most disturbing thing was finding a small piece of paper in the dead man's hand that said, "The mountain remembers what you did in the cellar." This event, which happened more than a year after Turner went missing, made it seem like someone, either Turner himself or people working for him, was still in the area and was carefully tracking down everyone who was involved in what happened in the root cellar. It made people in the area more sure that the Turner case was not just the story of a runaway slave, but also a planned act of revenge. The mystery was still mostly about what happened to Elias Turner in the basement. In 1874, Julia Caldwell, Jeremiah's oldest daughter, who had been away at school during the events of 1842, gave testimony to a Freedmen's Bureau historian who was writing about the horrors of slavery. This gave some answers. In her sworn statement, Julia said, "My father had long suspected Elias of encouraging resistance among the other slaves. When food began to disappear during the shortage, he used it as pretext to make an example of him. The punishment devised went beyond the typical brutalities. My father, brother, and overseer, Whitaker, took Elias to the root cellar. They chained him in a standing position where the groundwater seeped in, so that he stood ankle-deep in the cold water day and night. They denied him food, giving only enough water to keep him alive. But worst was the darkness. They sealed every crack, ensuring total blackness, believing the sensory deprivation would break his will." She went on, "What they didn't know And what I only learned later from our house servant was that the cellar had a history even before our family bought the property. The previous owners had used it for darker purposes. They were said to have practiced old country rituals there, trying to talk to beings they thought lived in the deep places beneath the mountains. There were carvings in the stone foundation that had been hidden under years of dirt, and Elias would have felt them with his bare feet every day as he stood in the dark water. This testimony suggests that Turner's time in jail may have unintentionally exposed him to parts of folk magic or ritual that were previously hidden in the cellar. This may explain why later accounts say he learned forbidden things while he was being punished. It also makes it clear how bad the treatment he got was, which gives him a lot of reason to get back at the people who hurt him in a planned way. County land records show another interesting fact. When the Caldwell Plantation House was built in 1798, the builders found an unusual geological feature while digging the cellar. The builder's notes say that there was a narrow crack in the bedrock that went down deeper than could be measured with the tools they had. Instead of fully exploring it, they filled it in and built over it. This is in line with what Professor Mitchell's team found in 1965, which suggests that the root cellar was built right on top of a natural entrance to the cave system in the area. It is unclear if Turner found this entrance while he was in jail, or if he already knew about it. It seems more and more likely from the historical evidence that the cellar was both the place where he suffered the most and the way out of his imprisonment. This cruel irony would have made his later campaign against those who had imprisoned him there even more meaningful. The last known victim in the Turner case was Reverend Silas Montgomery, a local minister who often led services at the Caldwell Plantation. Church records say that Montgomery went missing while traveling between parishes in November 1843. His horse came back to the town of Willsboro without a rider. A search party found his belongings scattered along a forest path that led to the mountains. Among them were pages torn from his Bible, with certain passages circled in what looked like dirt mixed with blood. The marked verses were all from the book of Exodus, and they were all about the plagues that hit Egypt. This suggests that Turner saw his punishment of the people who had enslaved him in a biblical way. The last marked passage was the most frightening. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. Montgomery's body was never recovered, but his journal, found among his abandoned possessions, contained a disturbing entry dated just days before his disappearance. I am troubled by growing certainty that I bear some responsibility in the Turner affair. Though I spoke often against the harshest physical punishments, I never directly opposed Caldwell's treatment of his property. Indeed, I blessed the search parties as they departed, praying for their success in returning the fugitive to his rightful owner. Now I find myself thinking of Turner's eyes during Sunday services, how they seemed to look through me rather than at me, as if measuring the depth of my complicity. Last night, I dreamed of him, standing at the foot of my bed, silent and watching. Upon waking, I found mud on the floor beside my bed, though it has not rained in weeks. This account suggests that Turner's campaign extended beyond those directly involved in his punishment to include those who had enabled the system through their tacit approval and religious justification, a wider circle of moral culpability that aligned with the broader patterns of his apparent revenge. In 1954, renovations to the Wilkes County Courthouse uncovered a sealed packet of documents in a storage area that had been forgotten. This was the last piece of disturbing evidence. One of them was the full report from the coroner who looked at the remains found in the mountain cave. Some parts of this report had been left out of the official record that was sent to the state. This part of the full report said, "The way the bodies were arranged needs to be commented on." The skeletal remains had been placed in a way that made a recognizable pattern across the cave floor, the same symbol that was carved into several of the surrounding stones. The most disturbing arrangement was the central one, where the skulls of 8 people had been placed in a precise circle. At the center of this circle was a 9th skull, which was unique because of its unusually pronounced cranial structure. Preliminary examinations suggest that this skull belonged to a person of African descent. This discovery suggests that Turner may have died in that cave with his pursuers, making him the focus of whatever ritual or symbolic arrangement had been made with their bodies. It paints a picture of a situation in which Turner led his enemies to a final battle where they all died together, getting his revenge but also losing his own life. Still, this explanation doesn't explain the events that happened in the months and years that followed, such as the death of Martha Caldwell, Jeremiah's terrified flight and death in Richmond, the fire that killed Daniel Roberts, and Reverend Montgomery's disappearance. If Turner died in the mountain cave with the first search party, who or what kept his revenge campaign going against the people who hurt him? Some historians think that accomplices were other slaves on the plantation who knew about the underground passages and kept Turner's work going after he died. Some people say that the hidden Cherokee settlement might be waging a proxy war against the white settlers who took their land. But the region's oral histories suggest something even more disturbing, that some part of Turner's presence or influence stayed in the area long after his body died. In 1932, an old man told folklorist Margaret Simmons, "The old folks said Elias Turner made a deal in that cellar darkness, not with the devil like some people say, but with the mountain itself. He gave it his rage, his pain, and his righteous fury, and in return it gave him ways to move through shadow and stone. And when his body finally fell, his purpose didn't die with it. The mountain kept its promise, kept its memory, and kept its vengeance alive." The Turner story got a lot of attention again in 1967 when 3 college students went missing while hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains, which is about 25 miles from the old Caldwell property. 2 weeks after they were reported missing, their abandoned campsite was found. Their gear was still there, but there was no sign of the hikers. One of the things that was found was a camera with film that had been exposed. When the photos were finally developed, they showed a figure in the distance, looking at their camp from a ridge. The figure was dark and hard to see clearly, but one search team member said it looked like something pretending to be human because it was so still. The official report said that the students probably got lost in the woods and died from exposure. Their bodies may have been taken away by animals or lost in the rough terrain. But there were still rumors among the locals who helped with the search that the young people had camped near one of the Turner places. These were places where the line between the physical world and whatever realm Turner now lived in became thin. An archaeological survey done in 1968 as part of the search effort found something disturbing. The students' campsite had been set up, apparently by chance, right above a cave entrance that had never been mapped before. A little bit of exploration of this passage showed that it was part of a bigger system that ran through the area. It might even have led to the cave where the remains of the first search party were found decades earlier. Before he died, Professor Mitchell, who had led the earlier investigation into the Turner case, was asked for his opinion. His last notes on the subject, which are still in his personal papers, say, "The pattern repeats. The mountain remembers." Over the next few decades, the Turner legend was still linked to some events that happened from time to time. Hikers said they saw a lone figure on remote trails who would disappear when they got close. Carved into trees along some paths were strange symbols that looked like the ones found in the cave. This happened a lot after storms disturbed the older growth forest. A retired history professor from Duke University, Dr. Edward Coleman, started working on a full book about the Turner case in 1969. Colleagues say he had gathered a lot of paperwork and planned to do a lot of field work in the area where the events took place. 3 months into his research, Coleman's car was found on a mountain road near one of the supposed Turner places. When the car was searched, it was clear that he had carefully organized his research materials, including a detailed map showing places related to the case. Meeting local contact at Raven Rock Overlook to discuss cellar excavation possibilities. Breakthrough imminent regarding the symbol's origin. Read his last journal entry, which was written on the day he went missing. Despite extensive search efforts, no trace of Dr. Coleman was ever found. The last chapter of his unfinished manuscript, which was found in his university office, was called "What Waits in the Darkness." It only had one handwritten note in it. "He's watching me write this." The Blue Ridge region is still haunted by the fact that the Turner case is still open. Historical evidence gives us some answers about what happened in 1842, but the whole truth is still hidden, either in the mountain passages, in the memories of the long dead, or maybe still moving through the old forests, a patient presence that doesn't forgive or forget. Park rangers, And people who have lived there for a long time know which areas to stay away from, especially as the sun goes down. They tell visitors not to go on unmarked trails that seem to appear after it rains, to cave entrances that are partly hidden by plants, or to clearings where the forest suddenly and unnaturally goes quiet. For they comprehend what historians and archaeologists have not yet fully recognized, that the narrative of Elias Turner surpasses the historical documentation to resonate with something more profound and elemental. It speaks to the landscape's lasting ability to absorb and reflect human trauma, and to the way some acts of cruelty or resistance can leave such a deep mark on a place that they echo across decades. In the end, the most disturbing part of the Turner story may not be the question of how one man could have gotten such complete revenge on his oppressors, but the idea that some wrongs are so deep that even death can't stop their effects, that the land itself could become a vessel and vector for a punishment that goes beyond human time frames. As patient and unyielding as the mountains that silently witness our brief dramas. People who know the story of Elias Turner know a basic truth. The darkness under the mountains has been there for a long time, long before any human settlement, and it will still be there long after our buildings have fallen apart and our names have been forgotten. And in that darkness, something waits, something that remembers every act of violence, cruelty, and suffering that one person has done to another. Something that sometimes still calls to travelers who stray too far from marked paths, luring them deeper into the wilderness with promises of shelter, rest, and a warm welcome after a long journey. Something with a face that looks both familiar and strange, with empty eyes and a terrible smile. Something that has been waiting for you for a long time.